Hey guys, Lemon here, and welcome to Valheim. Valheim is a Viking-themed sandbox exploration game that has completely exploded onto the scene since it released on Steam a few weeks ago. I've been loving playing it solo and with a group of a few friends, and now that I'm nearing the end game, I thought it would be good to share a few top tips that will hopefully be useful to you. First up, learn to parry. So parrying is one of the core mechanics in the combat part of the gameplay. It's absolutely integral to success in combat, especially at the end game. So how do you do it? Technically it can be done without a weapon, but really you want a shield to do it. I tend to prefer the round shield, but it's your call what you use. To parry you simply right click to block just before an enemy hit is about to land. And when encountering new enemies I like to run around them a little bit to get an idea for what their swing speed is like before trying to time the parries. If you mess up the timing, it can go pretty badly. Some enemies are a lot easier to predict than others. I find that animals are particularly difficult because they don't really telegraph their attacks, but it's certainly possible to parry them. Parrying has two main advantages. As you can see, it knocks away the opponent, giving you the opportunity to land 3 critical hits on them, which deal greater than normal damage. And it also allows you to deflect a greater amount of damage than you normally would if you were just blocking. This can become particularly relevant when you find yourself up against 1-star or 2-star enemies whose attacks will still damage you through your block. You can parry the vast majority of enemies, though I believe some attacks from bosses aren't parryable. You can also parry ranged attacks, as I've shown earlier, and it looks really weird because the enemies get knocked back even though you never actually connected with them. Although again, the timing can be really difficult to get right with the ranged attacks because you never know quite when they're going to fire their arrow off. But with a bit of practice, you can get it. Very early on in the game, as you're adventuring around, you'll discover all variety of plant matter you can grab, most of which you can eat. This includes raspberries, blueberries, mushrooms, and thistle. Initially, it's not obvious that they're useful for anything except eating, but once you get to the mid-game, it's easy to stop bothering collecting them because you start making sausages, start cooking meat, and they all provide much better buffs than eating raw plant matter. However, in the late game, cooking and brewing start to become a lot more important, and suddenly you start needing all of these resources again in pretty large numbers. Particularly for the mead, you can need 15 berries plus other stuff per batch of mead. So whenever you're out and about in Valheim, make sure to pick up those berries and stuff and stash them away at home. Late game, there are 2 particular meads which you almost can't do without, the frost resistance and the poison resistance mead, so it's nice to be stocked up in advance. So this might be obvious to some of you, but it can also catch you out. The further you go away from home, the more dangerous enemies get. As you can see on screen here, I had to strip down to demonstrate the difference, but letting a greyling hit me near my spawn location was dealing around 3 to 5 damage, whereas heading to an area about halfway out from the centre of the map, the enemies are dealing around 3 times as much, which is no joke. So if you're finding that the difficulty of the game is ramping up a little bit too quickly, maybe try exploring areas a little bit closer to home. Upgrading your gear is definitely worth investing in. Here I'm just showing the difference between wearing an unupgraded set of iron armour and a fully upgraded set, which is a whole 18 points of armour, an increase of 40%. The initial cost for upgrading armours are pretty cheap too in comparison with the cost of the armour itself. Same goes for weapons, though I tend to prioritise armour first. To upgrade, just go to your crafting table or forge and then click over to the upgrade tab, which is to the right of the crafting tab, and then you'll see a list of all the things you can upgrade. When adventuring around Valheim, it's really easy to get caught unawares. Often if you're trying to travel to a specific location, you just go on autopilot and sprint in a straight line. If you're sprinting around, run out of stamina and suddenly realise you have a group of enemies on your tail, it's often a death sentence. So proceed with caution, check your surroundings, and snipe those Deathsquitos. A fun little thing me and my friends picked up on fairly early is that surtlings don't like water. Surtlings are an enemy found in the swamp by those big jets of fire coming up from the ground, and because swamps are so close to the sea level, all it takes is a tiny bit of digging to surround the surtling spawn locations with water. This means that every time you drop by the swamp you have a nice, easy, free supply of surtling cores and charcoal for your furnace. Portals are one of the most amazing quality of life things to be added to a sandbox exploring game like this, and the best thing about them is that they're cheap. You can just use them for everything. They cost 20 fine wood, 2 surtling cores, and 10 grey dwarf eyes. You should easily be able to get your hands on all these resources. So every time me and my friends are setting up to go fight a new boss, we'll build an outpost near the boss spawner, portal it up to make travel and transport of the resources really easy. If you're struggling to get the surtling cores, the first place you'll find them is the crypt dungeons, or the burial chambers, in the Black Forest. Here I discovered a really peculiar dungeon, which had 2 surtling cores in it and absolutely 0 enemies. Weird. When I first discovered the plains, I think I just misunderstood it and in my head interpreted it as the same thing as the meadows. But damn was I wrong. Plains looks nice and pretty, but is the end-gamiest area that currently exists. It's packed full of evil little enemies that will kill you in one shot if you're not wearing properly higher tier armour. The death skeetos can really easily catch you off guard, and the goblins don't look like they should hurt, but they seriously do. Here you see me wearing a set of wolf and padded armour, and the 1-star goblin manages to kill me through my shield. Making use of the rested buff is one of the absolutely most critical things in the game, in my opinion. After you get used to it, the game becomes aggravating to play without it. You get rested by spending time in a sheltered area with a source of heat, such as a campfire or a hearth. And the base rested bonus lasts for 10 minutes, but you can increase its duration by increasing the comfort of the area, by adding decorations and by adding furniture. The rested buff grants a massive bonus to health regeneration and stamina regeneration, so I highly recommend getting a nice long rested buff before heading out on any long adventures, and definitely before fighting any bosses. My final tip is this. Damage types can make a huge difference to your success in combat. Certain enemies will take more or less damage based on what you hit them with. A really visible example is what I'm showing here with skeletons. According to the stats on the weapon, the club I'm using should deal less damage than the spear. However, it's actually dealing more than twice as much damage because skeletons are vulnerable to blunt damage. And there's one boss in particular where this becomes relevant, so it's really worth paying attention to as you play. Also worth noting is the fact that spears really struggle to hit short enemies. So that was my top 10 tips for Valheim. I hope you enjoyed and found something useful. If you did, please do like the video and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.